Hello and welcome to the very first edition of the DuPont Collaboration Series. I'm Alicia Second. Well, recent manifestations of corporate responsibility have shown that corporate mindsets are shifting from doing less harm to doing more good. While regarded as a step in the right direction, the motivation behind the shift continues to be driven by reputation, license to operate, or positive brand association. On this edition of the show, we take a closer look at why reputation remains a key focus of sustainability efforts, as well as the means through which companies can evolve toward an operating model in which sustainability efforts deliver value. Joining me in studio to share their insights is Antoinette du Randt. She's Regional Director at DuPont Sustainable Solutions. Sheila Khama, who's Director of Extractive Resource Services, African Center for Economic Transformation. Mandy, Rhambaros, who's Senior Manager of Climate Change and Sustainable Development at Eskom, and Kgomoeswana, who's Executive Business Development at PPC. Thank you all for joining us today, and let's get straight into conversation. And perhaps, Antoinette, let's start off with you. Achieving sustainability may be the greatest challenge of the 21st century. That's a phrase that I came across upon researching for this conversation, and short from it being one of the current buzzwords, is there enough of an understanding of sustainability so that it can be achieved?
Sustainability ultimately needs to be defined. So sustainability is about the ability to endure, meaning that a company needs to be able to deliver profitably to their shareholders, but ultimately also minimize their impact on the environment. And in the long term, we need to deliver sustainable social value to the local communities in which we operate. And I think we understand the first part very well around delivering the profitability. We're getting to a place where environment is playing a really big role. We have transparency, we understand how to measure that. But the challenge really is how you bring all three together and ultimately deliver within the communities that you operate. Now, DuPont is a science company, and we work in collaborative partnership to work with people within the communities to deliver innovation that would address those needs. But ultimately, we need to be in a win-win situation with all the stakeholders within that specific geography.
Sheila, by that definition, it seems like a simple enough concept to understand, but it's a concept that's still very much contested. So what are we looking at when it comes to sustainability, and why the debate in your books around what it actually encompasses?
Well, I think fundamentally because sustainability is evolving. And so by definition, you're not going to come to a point where you say, we have now defined it, we've locked it in the safe, now let's get on with the business of making money. Precisely because one, it means different things depending on the nature of the industry, but also it means different things depending on who the stakeholder needs are that you are trying to address. And for that reason, I think of sustainable development per se as something that is evolving, around which the science needs to continue to evolve. And companies like DuPont particularly, I believe, are at the forefront of potential assisting us understand scientifically what the solutions are that we can deliver.
Mandy, with it being an evolving issue, to what extent are you seeing businesses evolve in tandem, so that evolution happening within this realm as well? Because sustainability is not an asset that can be bought or sold. It has to become an integral part of the company's philosophy, and it's going to place moving targets in front of it all the time.
Absolutely, and I think that's the biggest reason why people struggle with the concept, is because they try to look at it as something separate from business, when it's actually something that is your business strategy. So being a sustainable business in the end means, are we going to be here in 20 years? Are we going to be here in 30 years? And in order to say yes to that question, you have to evolve your business model, and sustainability has to be an integral part of that. So it's not about, let me add on environmental management, let me add on social value, let me add on profitability. It's about how we do all of that together to deliver in terms of sustainability. So absolutely, your business model has to evolve and has to change to meet that growing need.
Surely that's the reality of doing business in the first place, that the environment that you work in, it's an evolving operating environment. Why hasn't this been done already? Why is it happening more so now?
Because by nature, Alicia, business tends to be short-termist. So you're under pressure to deliver profits and dividends to your shareholders. You're under pressure to pay off your bank loans. You're under pressure to be seen to be successful, especially relative to your competitors. So you put yourself under so much pressure that you can't think 20 years from now. It's only in hindsight that you realize some of the decisions you made to protect your bottom line made it impossible for you to sustain your business over the longer period of time. And I'm lucky because, I mean, PPC has been around for 122 years. So certainly there's been a lot of changes, a lot of evolving conditions, requirements. It started when South Africa was only an emerging economy in its rudimentary stages, but it has now tried to move into the rest of the continent. So you cannot just think 5 years around the corner. You should think 20 years. You should think almost, what kind of company am I going to leave behind for my stakeholders? But I must say that the modern assessment of business performance, because it tends to be inclusive of the social, environmental, not just the financial bottom line. It will make it easier for businesses to think more sustainably.
So let's go through some of those motivating factors here. I mean, what's the current driver for those who are shifting? Does it have more to do with reputation, regulation, or because of what it spells for business in terms of growth and profitability in the long term?
It's just understanding that your bottom line means nothing if it's not sustainable. Because when you deliver bottom line, you're delivering profits and then dividends to shareholders. But you don't want to operate for 50 years and find that shareholders who thought they had a share worth something discover after 50 years that the decisions you made 50 years ago have made their share to take a tumble. Think of companies that are slapped with lawsuits because they are polluting the environment, and suddenly the liability arising from the pollution wipes out all the value that they would have spent all the years building. So I'm sure leadership is beginning to be aware of that, and also the shareholder activism, stakeholder activism, that communities are challenging more how businesses are doing their normal core undertakings. And also the fact that perhaps lessons from the past are beginning to sink in, and the information technology that allows people to share information across the world means now it's easier for people to know right across the world what your violations of that social and environmental responsibilities are.
Antoinette, for those who aren't on this page just yet, I mean, let's spell out how sustainability initiatives actually create value.
Well, if you look at shared value, right, I think from a collaborative point of view, you first have to define that within the communities. Ultimately, the company would need to be profitable, to be sustainable, to be there in the long run. DuPont has been around for more than 210 years, and we had to evolve, to your point as well, Victor, where you have to get to a place where your created value, your innovation that you might bring, in our case through market relevant science, would deliver value not just for us as DuPont, but also for the community and the specific geography, and help local partners there to help grow the economy.
So because you're looking at two sides of the coin here, this is what takes this whole concept beyond CSR and philanthropic endeavors.
Absolutely. There are actually three sides of this particular coin, because you need to bring in your local community and the stakeholder on the ground as well. So you have the company, probably the government of that country that would have a specific need set, and then you have the local communities who now demand, and rightfully so, to share in the rewards of the national resources. So as an example, DuPont, for instance, in Ethiopia, we would work with local partners in that particular country. There are 80 million people. A vast majority of them belong to the Orthodox Church, and they have 250 days of fasting, which clearly needs they have a nutritional need around an alternative to animal products and protein. So we developed a soya product that would work towards helping them create value, sustainable value within their community, something they can really feel and touch on the ground. You work with a local partner who you empower to grow and to help them develop jobs, and we ultimately benefit as well. So now you have three sides of the coin, and you approach it in that way, and ultimately you have a sustainable business.
Sheila, let's bring you in at this point, because you are the former CEO of De Beers Botswana, and being a part of the extractive industry, I think it's companies within that space that come under fire more so in terms of giving back to the communities they're extracting resources from. So how exactly has De Beers managed to navigate this situation, and how do you determine just how much investment a company should be making towards this kind of space?
I mean, firstly, you are right that natural resource companies, more than any, under the spotlight with respect to natural resource extraction and value addition. And I want to just start by addressing why that is so. I mean, when I think of sustainable development, I think of it as a value proposition. And the value proposition is this, that we will take from nature, but from that we will replicate sufficient value to compensate nature and future generations. This is essentially the simplistic formula for sustainability in natural resources. And this is particularly true for natural resources that are luxury commodities like diamonds. Because for one, people interact with them very directly. Most of the minerals that we extract are here in this room, and many of us are unaware. But diamonds, because of their nature, we are more intrinsically. And so for companies like De Beers, they are particularly challenged because they have a direct relationship with the product and the user. And to your question of how do companies like that then achieve sustainable development, is precisely by engaging, especially consumers, to understand the value of the extraction as delivered to the countries in which they operate. And in this particular instance, Botswana would be an example. The partnership between Botswana and De Beers, which is DEPSWAN, of which I was a non-executive director, would be considered by many scholars as one of the best private partnerships in terms of the natural resource industry. But it doesn't end there. Companies alone cannot deliver. The partner governments must play their part. And therefore, De Beers could not come into Botswana, extract diamonds and deliver in perpetuity all the aspects of sustainable development. The government of Botswana, in its use of its natural resources, the revenue, the government of Botswana in its laws as relate to environment, the government of Botswana in its enforcement of those laws is an integral partner. So I think the important thing is to understand no one person, no one entity can deliver sustainability. It is the governments, it is the companies, and indeed it is the consumers. And the assumption that somehow in this space they are perpetrators and victims is really a fallacy.
Exactly, because we've got to look at this collaboratively more than anything else. Mandy, I mean, let's answer this question in terms of value. I mean, we had Sheila highlighting that it's a value proposition that's coming to the fore here. When it comes to investing in a space, any investor is going to look at return on investment at the end of the day. How do you determine just how much gets spent on investing in sustainable development issues at Eskom?
That's a very good question. And you know, we have a very good example in terms of the service that we provide, because providing electricity in most places or everywhere in the world is seen as something that is absolutely essential for growth and development. In South Africa, we've seen that it's underpinned economic development, and it's been extremely important. We've seen how we've struggled with the supply-demand constraints in the last few years. But if we look at Medupi Power Station, let's take that for an example, where we're looking at building a power station. So if we take a traditional business model and you just build a power station, that's what you'll have at the end of the day, a power station providing electricity. But if we look at Medupi Power Station in the area where we're building, as you know, is an impoverished area. And in terms of delivering value, what we've done is also done social upliftment of the area. So things like water reticulation, which is not necessarily part of building a power station, building communities, building schools, providing clinics, and providing access roads and those kind of things. Yes, it delivers value to us at the end of the day because we need access. But I've read this somewhere that said business cannot succeed in a society that fails. So it's no point in having this massive power station in an impoverished area and not doing any social value or social upliftment. At the end of the day, it is a big upfront capital expenditure to do that. But the value comes back in that you're providing electricity to people. You also encouraging the development of small businesses, which is extremely important in South Africa. So, you know, people then would start demanding more electricity. So in the end, at the end of the day, you do get value back into the company. But you also, in doing all of that, uplift communities, create jobs, you know, get to the point of where we're now starting to create equal value for people in the country, which is extremely important.
I ask the question, Victor, because when benefit is not clear enough to justify on economical grounds, managers easily turn to initiatives that guarantee, as you highlighted earlier, short-term results in everyone's jobs, especially with the recession, you know, knocking on the door. So does economic imperative have to be there, or do managers need to to start seeing a change in the way they think?
Not only the managers, the analysts as well. I mean, you know this. Every day you sit on your screens, you show us how this company is outperforming the market, it's outperforming the industrial average, is outperforming other stock markets elsewhere. That analysis is not complete unless it's backed by the context in which those earnings are made. If the earnings are made on the back of unethical practices, analysts should be able to point these out because they are a leakage on the future earnings and the future value of the asset. So it's not just the managers. The managers, of course, are acting as agencies of the shareholders. They're acting as agencies of government sometimes. If governments are shareholders, they have to comply with laws and everything. But I think the community as a whole should evolve, and I'm sure that evolution is happening. As I say, 20 years ago, the discussion we're having now would have been seen as an eccentric discussion that only few people should have. Now almost companies on the stock exchange are reporting on their sustainability. The Sustainability Reporting Initiative globally is asking companies to prove that they are not making financial returns on the back of practices that are going to make the asset to deliver share returns for 20 years and then disappear. And in doing so, leave employees in dire straits, people whose retirement earnings depend on the sustainability of the business in dire straits, and put the revenues that are paid to government in taxes in jeopardy.
Okay, so we've laid the case out on the table. Antoinette, if I'm a business now looking to go down this route, where do you start? What's step one?
Ultimately, I think it starts with leadership. We talk about managers and there's a collective ownership, but it's a mindset change and sometimes it needs a catalyst. And I think we're currently at a juncture where this is happening in Africa as well, where people understand what the stakes would be. How do you differentiate yourself? And if you want to be in the game, all your business decisions need to be informed every step of the value chain. When you plan to enter into a country, you need to have an integrated sustainability strategy that informs your business decisions. If you engage in particular programs, if you put a certain operation down, if you work with local supply, all of those decisions need to be informed. And it's not necessarily, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are amazing business cases and there are examples where we can learn from one another. So ultimately it's about collaboration as well. And to bring that into a strategy that then has practical outcomes, working with local stakeholders, be it the government or local communities, and to sustainably deliver a legacy at the end of whether it is 100 years or 20 years, but you make those decisions right at the beginning. And it informs you every step of the way, and you work in a cycle that continuously improves.
Sheila, I mean, of course, when you're looking at this, I came across a few questions that businesses should ask. You know, why is embedding sustainability important to my organization? What are the internal and external drivers? What are my organization's material relevant sustainability issues? Are these questions trickier to answer than it would seem at the surface, or is it pretty clear-cut?
My sense is that they are more difficult to answer. They are difficult to answer, especially from the perspective of application. If it was just theory, of course we could answer them. But the point is that the sort of answers we are looking for are those that instigate change. And that then means that you have to bridge the gap between theory and practice. They are also difficult to answer because actually you don't answer them in isolation. You answer them in relation to the industry, but also you answer them in relation to the expectations of your stakeholders. Your question to Antoinette about where do you start, for instance, is a case in point. As a company, do you start off by engaging the government, which is the host government, or do you ignore the host government and instead go straight to the communities? And if you address both, what is the order? And if they are conflicting, whose view do you engage in your strategic exercise? These are real difficult issues. And so when we answer these questions, we have the right context in terms of the stakeholder, the environment, culturally, socially, and physically, in which we are answering them. The context is wrong. Context, in my mind, is everything. Context of time, context of history, context of environment, context of politics. What works here in your country, South Africa, might not work next door in Mozambique. And so I think, you know, the question of where do you start is vital. If you ask me as a citizen of Africa, I would say you would start with the governments. I elected them so that they can steward this ship. I expect them to be the ones that create the framework around which investors can then know where do I find my space in this big framework.
Mandy, to what extent is that easier said than done?
Oh, to a big extent, I think. It's a lot easier said than done, but you know, it is difficult to answer the question. And I think if you sit down with, say, we're going to write a sustainability strategy, and you start writing, you know, how do I answer these questions, you'll never get anywhere. So I think that the whole idea of how do we put this into practice? What is our aspiration? What is our goal as a company is very important in terms of answering those questions. If you as a company say our vision is to provide the most sustainable electricity that we can to uplift the community, to reduce the impact on the environment, if that is your overall vision and your overall goal, it's set in stone if everybody buys into it in the company. From the leadership to the managers to the guys that are running the cost centers that have to release the money, if everybody buys into that vision and see it being lived and played out, then those questions become easier to answer. It don't necessarily become easier to do because you still need money to do a lot of those things.
And there's still quite a few hurdles that need to be cleared as well.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the challenges to setting this all up, you've got to look internally, the systems that you've got in place, the tools that you have access to, the skills pool that you have access to as well. I mean, how big a challenge do those three aspects alone pose?
I think the skills challenge is quite over the last few years has been quite a big challenge. But I would say recently, if you look at the universities now offering degrees in sustainable development, in environmental management, but it's changing the mindsets of people that didn't experience that in their education and in their experience of being in business. So when you get more and more people coming into the business, if you get people that are introduced to courses like those that are run by Cambridge Sustainability Program, or I find that if you use external resources to come into your company and talk about the aspects of sustainability, it actually is very, very helpful. So getting the mindset change is the most important thing. Then setting up systems and setting up the way your business runs follows. But again, it does require you to put in money. And I think where we struggle as companies with answering these questions is that the sustainable development benefits you see are usually very long-term returns, whereas some of us are struggling with short-term problems. You know, we don't have money to run the business on a daily basis. I often say that when you go and you ask for money for long-term sustainability issues, it's like asking your dad for money for chocolate when you can't afford bread. You know, that's sort of the analogy you can use. But that is why you need to accept in a company that some of the initiatives we do, absolutely we have to answer our short-term problems. But the short-term decisions must enable you then to fulfill your long-term aspirations for your sustainability.
Yeah. You've got to assume when it comes to implementation, Victor, that part of the problem is that maybe unviable targets and goals were set in the first place, and that's why we're missing targets at the end of the day.
Of course, if you set your targets only on the basis of what the next door neighbors are doing, you're setting yourself up for failure. It works in a personal space as well. You know that if you start trying to keep up with your neighbors, and that's why I was saying the analysts, government, shareholders should start being more realistic and understand.
How do you ensure that there's realism in your approach?
No, education is very important. Educating the shareholders, making sure that shareholders are not just buying shares because they heard that they can get good returns. They should understand how do they get those good returns. And there are countries that prove that. I mean, I went to the Kenya Stock Exchange and I meet a 22-year-old young Kenyan woman who says, I've got some stocks that I've invested in here and I'm just seeing how they are doing. That's not something you normally get maybe at the Exchange Square here, where a 22-year-old is out to find out more about their companies, their investments and how they perform. Education means managers understand that their role is not just to do what they are told, but to also show the stakeholders, and I'm saying stakeholders, not shareholders, stakeholders that there are more possibilities, because that's what leadership should do. It should show people that there are possibilities. What is the possibility I'm talking about? That you can be financially responsible, socially responsible, environmentally responsible, and that way you ensure that you might not be more financially competitive compared to your other rivals in the industry, but you'll be around delivering those returns for much longer than they will be. That to me sounds like sustainability. Yeah. So you might not be the most outstanding, you might not be number one, but if people look at your delivery of returns over a period of time, they'll see that you are consistently growing value, and you will guarantee with your overall attitude towards your business management and leadership that you'll be around for much longer. You will outlive your competition.
Antoinette, very hard to argue against that.
I want to offer a view on the practicality of sustainability. You have the tools already in the organization. If you optimize those tools and you don't see it as a separate issue, it's possible to really deliver value. In 1990, we were one of the first companies to articulate our environmental goals publicly. And since then, we have managed to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 72%. We've saved $6 billion in terms of energy expenditure, and all the time doing that, we increased production by 40%. So that helps us inwardly. But we're also at a place where we have articulated market-facing goals. So we deliver innovation, but with a view to invest in research and development in those products that will actually help the environment, that will help other our clients and other organizations to achieve the same results. So again, it's about integration. It's about how you establish those goals. Obviously, our goal is around profitability and delivering shareholder value, but we can do it in a way that's very practical and very practically delivers value at an environmental level in this particular case.
Victor, you had a
I mean, I just wanted to comment because now that Antoinette is giving a practical example. I just have two quickly to share. At PPC, we have to monitor continuously that the quality of the cement we are producing is what it should be, right? Because you promise strength to the market, that your strength is this much. You can't wait for the product, the finished product. You've got to monitor. So we've got screens literally that monitor. And one of those monitors are checking the dust levels in the environment. So we know almost on a continuous basis that you're not polluting the air, you know. But the other example is people talking about used oil, car oil. We set up a small company in Kimberley that starts collecting used oil that we are now using as an energy source in our factory. And it's now actually even a sustainable business on its own. It's not just about, so by creating a supply chain opportunity for employees who are about to retire to go out and identify a problem, which for us is about energy efficiency, but for the environment is about making sure used oil doesn't pollute the rivers and the environment. You create a solution that feeds into your business model. The result, we save on energy, we create jobs in this oil collection, used oil, whatever, and at the same time, we are able to improve our supply chain efficiencies.
Well, let's leave the conversation there for now. We're heading into a quick commercial break, but we'll see you straight after this, so don't go away.